Before we start this episode, let's just give a big thank you to all our new listeners who have also rated the show with lots of 5-star reviews. Thank you, because that really does make such a big difference. So welcome to this episode of A Dog's Life. And of course, that's with myself. I'm Anna Webb, and it's with my trusty co-host, Mr. Binks. We're jumping on Zoom now to talk to Caroline and Andy from The Farmer's Dog, all about why feeding raw is really the best thing to do and why their range of bone broth and their raw meaty bones are said to have more meat on them than others. Andy Gray of The Farmer's Dog and Caroline Griffith of The Farmer's Dog and the Natural Dog Expo, welcome to A Dog's Life.
Thank you very much for having us.
No, it's a real pleasure, actually, because I'm looking forward to today's conversation, not least, Andy, because we met at the Natural Dog Expo. And I must say, Prudence, my miniature bull terrier, really loved her lamb that we got from you up there.
That's excellent. Good.
Now, would you say the quality of your lamb does differ from other lamb ingredients in dog food in the UK?
Well, we hope so anyway, in as much as we're butchers ourselves, so we are sourcing very good quality meats for our butchery. We predominantly source from regenerative type producers, as in regenerative farming type producers, or very much regionally to the southwest, with I would say 99% grass fed. It's very unlikely that any of our lamb won't be grass fed. So I would think that it compares remarkably well. And the other great thing about our opportunity as being butchers is the fact that it's going to be incredibly it'll be processed in a very timely manner, because we're just moving it from one side of our business to the other.
That's extraordinary that you are actually butchers. So do you actually sell the dog food in your butcher's shop?
No, and when I say we're butchers, we're catering butchers, so we supply hotels and restaurants. So we've been in the meat trade since 1955, supplying locally farmed meats, a lot of which was our own. So we do know our way around a piece of meat. So most of our customers are actually hotels and restaurants, everything from Michelin-starred restaurants down to the corner shop and the corner takeaway. So we just do meat is what we do.
Gosh, that's brilliant. So something I know Caroline and I have chatted about is how human grade is used to define a lot of meat in the fresher side of the pet food industry, but obviously a lot also in the processed side. What do you make of that? I mean, it's a very, it's human grade.
Yes, I mean, I think we take the view that we use, I mean, in the main, we use what I call less commercially successful or useful cuts. So things like with the lamb, we tend to use lamb breast and things like that, the bits which don't sell as easily because they're just not as fashionable nowadays, and we have to balance the carcass. So we're not taking food out of the human chain, but we're using things which don't actually sell particularly well. All very much good quality, but just not what people are actually wanting to buy.
No, interesting. But of course, that really makes it sustainable, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's partly on the sustainable thinking that actually got us started on this course. We try to make the most value out of every part of the carcass and every part of what we do. So we, as a business, we generate most of our own, a large proportion of our own electricity using both solar and wind. We recycle heat by capturing cooling the heat that comes off our coolers. And the same sort of principle applies to the byproducts and the less easily sold parts of the various carcasses that we're cutting up and the various meats that we're using. So, but for instance, we process about 6,000 deer a year, and they there's quite a few parts of a deer's carcass which are better to go into dog food than in other directions. And obviously, all those beautiful bones with meat attached to them, they sell remarkably well through the dog food as well. So yeah, on the whole, it's just a sustainable approach to all the streams that come through our processes.
Yes, and I think that's very interesting. So, I mean, Caroline will bring you in. What do you think, Caroline, having worked in the pet food industry for, gosh, I would imagine nearly 20 years now, this whole kind of battle between meat over plants?
Well, that's an interesting one. I thought you might let me take the easy question of adding my bit about human grade there.
No, well, you can. You
Okay.
can. No, you can. It's just me trying to be Kate AD here. But you know, there is such a battle almost at the moment. There was a piece in a magazine recently, actually. As usual, you know, a lot of vegan dog owners and cat owners. I could understand it, you know, maybe feel a bit awkward about feeding, you know, a raw, balanced, incomplete food. But at the same time, you've got to remember that, you know, certainly in my view, and I'm sure in both of your views as well, you know, dogs cannot thrive being vegans. But a lot of people, a lot of science is really pushing out there that they can, you know.
I think that's happening across the board, even for humans as well. I mean, the difference with humans is that you have the two sides of the coin, and it's never been ultra proven what type of gut biology we really have. So, you know, you could make the argument we can survive off plants, and there's many people that make the argument that we literally should only be eating meat and absolutely no plants at all. Whereas with dogs, really, realistically, the biology is that they need to eat meat. So, you know, if we're going to talk about species appropriate feeding, we have the choice because we don't know as humans, but obviously as dogs, then it makes more sense that we feed them appropriately.
No, absolutely. No, I'm writing a piece at the moment, and I'm going to actually compare, you know, the human digestive system as being much closer to a herbivore's than, so we are actually more like a herbivore, like a horse's stomach actually, than we're far away from being a canine, a carnivore.
I think also, Anna, because the movement of veganism has grown and changed and developed over the years. So originally, when I was much younger, my mum dabbled in being a vegan and a vegetarian, and it was about eating whole foods then. Now it seems to be that being vegan is done by eating processed food. And, you know, I think Andy will agree with me, the movement away from processed food is what really interests us. And that's one of the reasons we really would like to see more dogs eating less processed food and moving on to fresh food. So I think that's something to consider in terms of if you're going to feed your dog vegan, at least do it with fresh food. But I honestly can't see even then how long-term that would sustain them.
I mean, it's baffling to me that you feed it things which barely are recognizable as food, as far as I can see.
Yeah.
And you know, the other thing is, what am I, 58, and I've had dogs since I was 4, and I've always maintained them on a meat diet way before the greater uptake of raw food feeding. So all the way through, basically, and all of my dogs have lived to a prodigiously great age and have, you know, they've been very robust dogs throughout their lives and had great lives. So I can only talk about my experience with many dogs over many years who've all been on meat diets, and they do remarkably well. And they're very good at working out what else they want. So, you know, they tend to pick a bit of this and a bit of that you drop in the kitchen as well, just to get their balance. And you know, because we were farmers, we'd very often skin and feed a lamb to our dogs, and they'd always have a bit of the tripe to get those vitamins from the tripe. So, you know, I'm absolutely convinced that ultra processed and highly processed foods are just bad for dogs and bad for people.
Well, I think the science is out there so much more on a human level, which I always say is great because it enables a much clearer conversation to happen, by comparing a human's diet. We know now we've got to have our 5 a day. It's got to be fresh, processed is bad, additives, all the extra sugars hidden in there, so just transfer that thought process to your dog, and then people kind of get it.
Absolutely. And the other thing with the dog is he doesn't actually, most dogs, unlike mine who run around a farm, most dogs don't actually have a lot of choice in their diet because they get what they're given. Whereas, with us humans, we do actually have the opportunity to be a bit more fussy.
Yes. Well, I suppose we do go shopping and we have a duty
Make
of
choices.
care, though. Yes, we can make choices, but our duty of care is to make sure that our dogs are looked after to the highest standards. And it does actually say that in the Animal Welfare Act, that dogs are fed appropriately. There is that wording in there, Caroline.
Well, that's interesting. That's fantastic to know. I think that's what's actually quite interesting about determining which food you're going to go for, even within the raw brands that you're faced with on the internet. It's an ever-growing part of the pet food industry, which is nothing but a good thing, but it does sometimes lead to confusion. And I often see posts on Facebook groups and questions about what is quality? How do I know that the raw food I'm buying is quality? And when I came to help here at the Farmer's Dog, that was something that I moved here and I felt so proud that the quality was genuinely good and better than the places that I'd been before. I don't know if Andy can explain a little bit more about that, but from my point of view, I sort of saw that most of it is grass-fed, which meant a lot to me because the nutrition is actually higher in a grass-fed, grass-finished animal. So I think when we actually consider what quality means in pet food as well, you're sort of moving up the ladder that little bit extra.
Yes, I mean the definitely grass-fed equals more nutrient dense when it comes to all the trace elements that you're wanting to get into your life or your dog's life. So I do think that when that opportunity is there, then it's definitely an additional benefit. And then on top of that, Steve, who does our recipes and looks after the manufacturing process, is incredibly fussy. So I think that helps as well.
Yeah, I think attention to detail, but it is interesting. Of course, the grass-fed, and I do feel so sorry for, a lot of cows. I mean, sheep, I know they have to kind of live out on the edge of mountains more than cows. But what is it about grass finishing, when I don't really understand the farming process. I think that's in the last bit of their lives, Andy. I mean, I'm not totally vegetarian or anything, but, I find the thought of it a bit, but I'm a bit of a townie, I suppose, in that respect, Andy, so apologies. But there's grass-fed and there's grass-finished, but lots of cows, I understand, are grass-fed, but they're not grass-finished. And does that matter? And what does it mean?
Well, but to get that extra fatness into some beef animals, some beef breeds will fatten more easily than others, and you do want a bit of fat in the muscles, which is called the marbling. So some farmers will be feeding a bit of grain at the end to just get that little bit of extra energy into a bullock to produce that marbling, about extra bit of flavor. But it does depend entirely on whether you're using indigenous breeds or or more sort of European breeds. So the European breeds tend to be much leaner. The sort of the Devons, the Herefords, and all the old-fashioned breeds from the UK tend to finish on grass perfectly well. And really, the whole purpose in agricultural terms of cattle and sheep is to turn something we can't digest, i.e. grass and leaves of various sorts, into something we can digest, as in nutrient-dense proteins. So that's what we should be doing with livestock, really. Sheep and cattle are up there to eat things we can't eat and turn them into something we can eat, as opposed to grains, which we actually should be eating those ourselves, and then we're having less demand on land and things like that. So it seems a shame to put too much grain into cattle when we could easily be making bread out of it and eating it instead that way. So we prefer the grass-fed route, and that grass is actually going to have much wider. It's a more appropriate food for cattle, and therefore it's going to be assimilated into their meat in a more useful way for those that eat it afterwards.
Well, yes, I mean, ruminants are a great source of omega-3, but if they eat a lot of grain, then of course the meat becomes more omega-6 heavy, and that
Indeed.
can be, yeah, so, and there's always that tricky balance with the omegas. Isn't that right, Caroline?
Oh, absolutely. So it's anti-inflammatories really that you're looking for. So there's some wonderful antioxidants in grass-fed meat or animals that make the meat. So the glutathione is higher. Definitely the omega-3 is higher. The vitamin E is much, much higher. It's bordering on not really being there in different ways of farming, but the vitamin E is there, more beta carotene as well, and also a fatty acid known as conjugated linolenic acid, which is just shortened to CLA most of the time. But that's really super good for dogs. So it's actually been linked in studies to an increase in muscle mass, a reduction in obesity, a reduction in diabetes. So it's lots of wonderful things about CLA, and you only really get that in the grass-fed animals.
Wow. So how is the pet owner going to, know for sure if the animals have been grass-fed and grass-finished, particularly if we're looking at the bigger FEDIAF guidelines, which, is something I would like.
They don't cover that.
Well, no, I know.
Yeah.
I know. And they're quite broad, aren't they? The actual FEDIAF guidelines.
So they're broad in terms of the minimum and maximum of certain nutrients, but I don't think they're broad enough in terms of the nutrients they include. So, I mean, something like CLA wouldn't even be on the guidelines, and yet it's incredibly beneficial for dogs. I think there's a difference between a dog surviving and a dog thriving. And when a dog is having whole foods, they are far more likely to thrive because they're having all the additional bits and pieces, all those lovely compounds that aren't even included on those guidelines. So yeah, CLA would be one of those.
Also, talked about now that there is a whole body of work talking about organ therapy. So, and the different cuts of different meats and the different organs that can balance in a kind of homeopathic like with like way. So if you've got a dog with a slightly dodgy kidney results, then up the fresh kidney in their diet to help balance and restore the kidney, which I find fascinating. And for and pork pancreas apparently is really good if there is an absorption problem. If an older dog isn't perhaps absorbing food perhaps as well as possible, and you kind of think, oh, the stools are a little bit weird, he's not really putting on as much weight as I'd hope, what's going on. What do you think of that as a theory, Caroline?
I think it's really interesting, and we should definitely be looking into it more. Feeding pancreas to support dogs with EPI or pancreatitis is definitely something that's been on my radar for a while. There's not an exact science to it because obviously the meat itself will have variables and the dog themselves will have digestive variables, especially if we're talking about the pancreatitis side of things. But I do know canine nutritionists. One super lady over in South Africa sent me some documents about this once, that she'd kind of got things down to how much you have to feed to make a bit of a difference. But it'd be lovely to have studies on it. That would be super to have that sort of evidence. But yeah, I don't know how far away they would be, but it's definitely worth considering. And it certainly isn't going to do any harm.
Well, this is it, isn't it? I mean, it's doing no harm, actually, which is a line that features in the veterinary oath that all vets actually have to declare, before they go and practice, is key, not to do any harm. But the idea is, I suppose, if food is a whole pillar of health, which it is, and if we are what we eat, which we are, and I think science now, not only in dogs, in cats, getting more so in cats. I mean, I feel, to be honest with you, that cats probably get the worst deal at the moment of all animals, because I think rabbits, there's been a lot of education there, and your small furries and on your little herbivores. Dogs were getting better, I think, that it's out there. Don't you think, Caroline? I mean, compared to 15 years ago. But cats, I think, are still lacking choice and options.
I think so. Well, the way we keep cats is so varied, isn't it? Generally speaking, if we have a dog, they do go out at some point in the day. Cats can be kept solely indoors, which I'm not pro. I'm not pro because I believe all creatures need to be able to stand on planet Earth and, you know, be connected in that way. But and so you've got that extreme that you're dealing with there, with possible inflammatory conditions, I guess is the word I'm looking for, could happen in a cat that never goes outside. And then you've got cats that are solely outside. You can't really see what they're eating, and they could possibly be catching things as well as eating the dry food that's sort of left down for them. So I think you're right that we probably need a better understanding of cats, because we've sort of shaped them to our will, haven't we, really, rather than really honouring who they are as a creature.
No, I know. I'm not a mad fan of indoor cats. I've only, had 2 cats. I mean, one gremlin, and then, I rescued this stray tomcat. He's very much an outdoor character. Yeah, absolutely. But I think, again, it's the same as dogs. And I think a lot of health conditions in cats. I mean, I think the figure for kidney disease in cats is so frightening. It's about 75% of all cats do die from renal failure. That, and that is...
It doesn't surprise me, Anna, because most cats are fed with no moisture in their food, and they're obviously carnivores.
I know. So yeah, so I think there's still scope for expansion, is what I'm thinking, in terms of getting fresh into the bowl, which I do agree is the overall message here, isn't it?
It's much harder with cats to do that. It is much harder with the transition, definitely. So, I mean, perhaps that's your thing. Perhaps this is your thing, Anna. You can start the Cat's Life podcast as well.
I know. I know. I've been talking far too much about cats, and lately had my knuckles rapped by my producer. So I should steer quickly now back to dogs. But the market has exploded, hasn't it? But and I think, lots of people say to me, oh, I've tried raw. Oh, you just didn't agree. And you think, oh no, I hate this bit in the conversation, because we now have to kind of explain that not all raw brands are the same. Not all dogs are the same, and different dogs, different breeds, even different shaped mouths might like a different texture. And it is true to say that different raw, balanced and complete foods, there's quite a range of textures out there with different brands.
Yes, there are, and different ingredients. I think also it's for me, it's stripping it right back to having this understanding that, people say, I've tried raw, as if raw is just one option, when really raw is the way to feed an animal. It's how all animals eat. And then we sort of deviate into these different options. But raw is just fresh whole foods. If we eat a salad, we're eating raw. Okay, it's not meat, but do you see what I mean? So it's this understanding that raw isn't just this one thing to try, and then if that doesn't work, you go back to processed. For me, it's this understanding that it's fresh, whole foods we need to be moving towards. If raw, for whatever reason, doesn't work for your dog, and I mean, you can definitely ring in here, and I'm happy to have a chat with anyone who might be struggling to get their dog transitioned onto raw, or perhaps fussiness has sort of kicked in, as it often does at sort of 9, 10, 11 months of a puppy's life. I'm happy to talk to people and support them through that. But also, if it really, really doesn't work, and before they get to talk to somebody like me, I would say don't hop the huge leap back to processed. Go on to fresh cooked. At least go on to fresh cooked with your dog, because the fresh message, I think, is the biggest message we need to be getting out there. Raw isn't necessarily for everyone, for all sorts of reservations that they might have, most of which are a sort of a concern rather than a truth. However, if those concerns are there, at least feed fresh cooked.
Yes, yeah, no, absolutely, of course, and then try and work towards either a brand. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But there's so much, another big topic, I guess, and I know because the farmer's dog do bill your bones as really meaty bones, which which I really like, because it is true that you can buy a marrow bone and there's really nothing there. There's hardly any marrow, and there's definitely not any meat, but we get it from our local shops. It's convenient. So tell us more about the really meaty bones.
Okay, so raw meaty bones, they there's a guy called Dr. Tom Lonsdale. He calls himself the grandfather of raw feeding, and his books are phenomenal. I would really encourage anyone who's already raw feeding to get them, especially. Now, raw meaty bones for him are the mainstay of the diet, and they actually really can be. You sort of start and build up so that you get to know your dog's own individual tolerance to bone. And you can feed them these bones as meals. So it may be that something like one of our venison necks or one of our lamb necks, you might find that they can actually be a whole meal for your dog. So it's very economical also to buy a box of those and use those as one meal of the day for your dog. Feeding raw meaty bones is usually the most economical way to feed raw to the dog. So it doesn't need to be expensive if you're including them. They're far safer than we think. We've actually got a series of videos with a lovely local holistic vet that are going to be coming out in August. Yeah. So we're celebrating Rawgust this August, and we're doing these lovely videos where the vet will literally go through the bones and explain which dogs they would be most suitable for.
And that's brilliant. No, I love that. But I think I read somewhere that, because some lamb's necks are quite bony, some marrow bones are very sparse and they're mainly bone. And it's very disappointing, for the dog not to have a really meaty bone. But I do believe the farmer's dog's bones do pride themselves on having a bit of meat on them.
Yeah, as Andy was saying, Steve, who gets involved with our recipes here and the manufacturing, he's really particular. So yeah, we are always looking for that bit of meat, because really it's the stripping of the meat from a bone that cleans the dog's teeth.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. But it's so interesting you're doing these videos because, yes, I mean, a lot of myths are propagated about giving your dogs raw bones. And of course, yes, there are incidents where, raw bones do cause accidents, but to supervise is very, very important, and to choose the right bone for the breed of dog that you've got. That's key, isn't it, Caroline?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. They are a lot safer than is perceived. And I actually think that dogs do know what to do with them, but we really need to give them a chance and maybe start with something easier to build our confidence. It's more about the guardian's confidence, I think, because the dog knows what to do with the bone.
Yeah, no, it's true. But it's such a simple and 100% amazing form of enrichment, because enrichment at the moment is being discussed hugely, and quite rightly so. Enrichment can mean taking your dog for a walk, sniffing in the bluebell woods, chewing a marrow bone, to interacting with the latest interactive toy, to using a good old-fashioned Kong or whatever it might be. But it's chewing. It's this natural instinct that releases endorphins in the brain and really calms dogs, I think, at a very deep level. That's why I think chewing will always be my actually preferred source of enrichment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, dogs carry a lot of tension in the TMJ and their jaw. So by releasing the tension in those fascia points, you're really helping the dog to be calmer. They're less likely to be barky. They're less likely to be snappy. Yeah, they will definitely feel more content after chewing or stripping and chewing away at these raw meaty bones.
Yeah, I love that word content, because that does actually sum it up, I think, which is brilliant. I know you've got quite a massive range already. I know Prudence did enjoy the lamb, as I mentioned earlier, but I believe you've got some other recipes, varieties coming out soon.
Yes, so we've got under a different brand, we've got a superfood range, which we're really pleased with. When our local holistic vet popped up a couple of weeks ago, I showed her the recipes and she was absolutely thrilled with them. She was already impressed with the sourcing that Andy mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, but then to see the recipe that we had created, it's got some really lovely things in it, like shiitake mushrooms. And as you know, mushrooms are very trendy at the moment,
Yes.
for humans and canines.
Very, very important. Shrooms, very anti-carcinogenic.
Yes, so it's got some really wonderful new and innovative ingredients. It's also got a different source of additional omega-3, which I won't give the game away too much, but yeah, that's going to be fantastic. We're the first fresh and definitely first raw to use this as an omega-3 source.
Oh, okay, I think I know what it is. But I've taken
this
the
on
step.
a postcard.
Yeah, I guess it's on a postcard. Yeah, and that's interesting. But in a way, it is related to fish oil, although it isn't fish oil, though, is it? We can say that. But
we're not using fish oil. No, that's what we wanted to move away from, because what you find is that adds another protein into things, and it's far easier if you stick to the proteins that are on the label. So yeah, that's one of the reasons why we wanted to move away from that.
But isn't it also, that the omegas in fish oil do oxidize really, really, really quickly?
They can do. I mean, anyone who buys any salmon oil or any kind of fish oil to use as a supplement for their dog would absolutely need to be keeping that in the fridge. I mean, if you've had a fish oil on the side even for a week or so, it's going to start turning rancid. I mean, manufacturers do their best to sort of put it in a dark glass jar and that sort of thing, but still it will happen. So yeah, they can go rancid. I mean, in a freezer, they shouldn't do as much. So in a raw food, they shouldn't really do that as much. But there's always that risk, of course.
Yes, and I just worry about the quality of the sea and rivers, actually, at the moment. I've done a lot of podcasts with Andrew Prentice of Imperial College and all the research that so many flea insecticides are ending up in British rivers at the moment. And as for the sea, I worry. So I don't really eat fish anymore. Myself, actually, because of all of this, I'll be honest. So I know, yeah, it's sad, but yes, but it's very interesting, your innovation, Caroline. So I'm very impressed. I am privy, but I won't say what it is.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
But you've got other stuff in there, like seaweed, isn't there? In there,
there is kelp. I mean, kelp is in a lot of dog foods because it is so good for dogs. I mean, the studies have really shown that kelp helps with periodontal disease, and it's full of minerals, and obviously helps regulate the endocrine system. So yeah, kelp is a sort of a fail-safe, isn't it, in most raw recipes? So obviously that's in there. Couldn't not put it in there. But yeah, I can't say that's innovative to us, but it's definitely an additional bonus alongside all the other superfoods.
No, that's amazing. So when can people get their chops around it?
Well, what we'll do is, if perhaps we give you a link you can add to the show notes.
Yes.
Then people can sign up to be on a waiting list to try this recipe. I mean, I've worked in the raw pet food industry for a long while, as you said at the beginning, and I am really pleased with this. I don't think there is another raw food recipe that's so innovative out there at the moment. So I would say definitely people are going to want to hop on the waiting list so that their dog can enjoy it as soon as it's released.
Yes, no, gosh, a waiting list. God, that makes it even more exclusive, doesn't it?
Definitely, yeah. It's very exciting, though.
So, Andy, what do you make of this?
Yep, I'm really keen on it. I think that the very out and out raw feeder probably is very good at balancing their dog's diet, but I think there's a huge swathe of people who actually it's much better for the dog if we can do it at source and apply all of our expertise to do it. So I just think this is it's a well thought out, well researched recipe, and we're really excited to get it out there and get people using it.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it is all really about longevity, isn't it? We all want our dogs to live for absolutely as long as possible. And in a way, it's not that complicated to help them do that.
It's not. And also it's about that quality of life when they are going, but giving them that extra ability to gallop about and enjoy themselves. So it's and we can do that with extra thought. I mean, when I was younger, people just didn't think about their dogs' diets particularly, and now we do have this fabulous interest in doing the best we can for them.
Yes, yes. And the farmer's dog, you do have broth as well.
We do, yes.
It's
Yes,
bone
Caroline
broth.
probably knows more about that.
Yeah, yes. Well, bone broth is so hot.
It is trendy, isn't it? But also dogs love it, and so many dogs do seem to really need some support in terms of the nutrients that's in it. So it's really good for helping with any sort of leaky gut, any digestive issues. Permeable gut lining, anything like that. So the glutathione in it, which I mentioned, that's actually in grass-fed meat as well. So they're sort of getting a double dose in the bone broth. It is a really, really good product.
I love it. Well, Hippocrates was talking about it way back in 600 BC. And then there's a South American proverb actually that says that a good bone broth will resurrect the dead. There we go. So, no, it is interesting, but it's also collagen, isn't it?
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah,
yes, that's part of it as well.
Yeah. And I think bone broth is denatured collagen rather than being processed collagen, which tends to be in the beauty market and in human supplements more, where it's hydrolyzed and turns into a different peptide powders mixed together. So yes, all defined by Roman numerals. I'm interested in collagen actually, because I think it's one of those sectors that's gone massive and it's heralded apparently to be even more massive very, very soon. And so I think it's important again to think of the natural sources of collagen and just to look at what Hippocrates says, really, because I think he definitely he talked a lot of sense, I think. What do you think, Andy?
Well, I mean, I know it's good for me because I make it and use it all the time for me. So I just think it's a wonderful product, and of course it's also incredibly sustainable because most of this would have been lost into the waste stream if we weren't harvesting it. So it's good from that angle as well.
Yeah. And I think, highlighting the sustainability of feeding dogs meat is important because there does seem to be, obviously we've got a climate crisis. But I mean, Andy, as a farmer and obviously an expert in meat, what do you think of all of this, that humans should only eat plant-based products and obviously their pets as well in a bid to save the planet?
I think it's much more complicated than that. I think that there's some very, very bad practices in meat production, predominantly on the American continent, and then grass-fed, grass-produced livestock in the northwestern European context is actually much less. It's highly sustainable, and that's because of the amount of carbon we can capture in soils through a pasture-based system where the plants are putting carbon back into the ground again, and the reduction in nitrous oxide and things like that. So it's a complex field. The one observation I would make is that there's an awful lot of money to be made in ultra processed vegan foods, and that's driven part of that debate because of the funding they can put into the lobbying and that sort of thing. But most of the agricultural scientists that I talk to, in fact, all of them, all very, very comfortable with rumen-based feed systems, food production systems, especially on landscapes where it's impossible to be growing vegetables anyway because of the nature of the land. So it's a complex conversation, and I always say that cars are very bad for the environment, so we strive to make them better. And from the point of view of livestock production, we are all working incredibly hard to not only take it to net zero, but into a positive state rather than being a climate risk, and we are rapidly moving down that journey already.
Gosh, I love that. That was so brilliantly explained. I just sort of drawing to a close now, but I did read a statistic that was a bit worrying only the other day, which was this, well, it's interesting rather than worrying, that apparently in the States, 35% of all the carbon emissions is generated by extruded food products.
Cool. Fascinating.
Yeah. So, yeah, I've tried to dig out the paper actually. And yeah, so I'm going to work harder at finding it because I thought that was awfully interesting, which, you know, would tally because a lot of the vegan processed food is extruded, I would assume. But we're going off piste a little bit here.
I think a lot of it, Anna, is made with sort of soya, and the trouble with growing masses and masses of soya is you end up with what's called like a monoculture, which doesn't help the soil or the environment at all. So the more we sort of move away from eating meat and trying to replace it with something, the more we're actually damaging planet Earth by doing that. So there's kind of this, like Andy said, it's a bigger picture, and you really have to understand all that you're doing to make up the jigsaw puzzle.
I mean, there are madnesses within the system. So we're cutting down rainforest to grow soya.
Yeah.
And one of the maddest things is that some of that soya ends up going into livestock, which is just so you're feeding a protein to produce a protein, which in itself is pretty dotty on occasions. There are occasional justifications. It's a bit like we take very high quality small fish and full of omega-3s and grind them up and feed them to salmon, which have got much fewer omega-3s. So as a consequence, we're feeding a high quality food to produce a much lower quality food in the farm salmon industry. So, you know, there are madnesses within our food system, which really we need to flush out and get people to understand a bit more of.
Yeah, that's really interesting. As I did read somewhere that, you know, fish generate their omega-3 by eating phytoplankton and, you know, algae. That's what's got the omega-3. It's just that then the fish eat it and then creates omega-3 in the fish, and then fish are edible for lots of other reasons. Hence, you know, the understanding of omega-3 being in fish, but fish per se don't, and they're not actually born with a lot of omega-3. Is that right?
They don't produce it. They merely eat, as you say, eat the phytoplankton, and then the fish is a way that we can access that omega-3.
Exactly. Well explained, Andy. Gosh, well, this has been a brilliant conversation. Look, thank you so much for sparing the time to highlight this, because it does unpick quite a lot of political issues, if you like, or the personal projection into feeding raw and explaining the human grade more. And yes, I can't wait to share the raw, meatiest bones in the UK with Prudence and Mr. Binks, I must say. And this super new variety, Caroline. Thank you for whetting our appetites.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. That's our show, Mr. Binks. What did you think? Yes, I know you are a massive fan of bone broth, as am I now. Thanks again to Andy and Caroline for joining us today. And of course, all the links to The Farmer's Dog are in the show notes. Thanks again to Mike, my producer, for all the music and production as ever. Find out more about Mike at Pod People UK, and find out more about me on my website, which is just annaweb.co.uk, or give me a follow on Instagram at annawebdogs. What's that, Mr. Binks? Yes, you're right. We will be back in your feed next Sunday. So go on, why don't you subscribe? It's free, and that means you'll never miss another show. Bye for now.
full.